I am very pleased to be here this morning to kick off the American Veterans Center session of speakers. And I'm particularly honored to have these three gentlemen sitting next to me. And let me briefly introduce them. Each of them had a unique place in the victory that we secured in World War II. To my immediate left is Mr. Robert Izumi. He was a member of the 101st Airborne Division in Europe. He was at Bastogne. He was at the Battle of the Bulge. He was on the honor guard for General Patton. And after serving in World War II, he went on to serve in Korea and Vietnam. In the middle is Peter MacDonald. Peter MacDonald is a United States Marine Corps, was a member of the legendary Navajo Code Talkers. And Peter's going to talk to us this morning about how that group was formed, why they were formed, and the critical role they played in victory in the Pacific during World War II. And finally, on the other end is Mr. Guy Whidden. Mr. Whidden was with the 402nd Infantry Regiment, 101st. He jumped into D-Day and jumped into Market Garden, and he'll be talking about that as well. But let's start with Robert here. Robert, give us a little background of your youth growing up there in California, particularly at the beginning of World War II.
I can't speak to it very well, but I was born in 1924, and half of you people probably don't know who Normandy Baker is. Anybody? Who? You don't know who it is? That's Marilyn Monroe. I went to school with her. So, yeah. And I flew with Neil Armstrong, the first astronaut. I worked with him. I stayed in the service from 1944 until 2007. I have a Colonel Martin in Marine Corps. I wish he was here. If it wasn't for him, I don't think I would have survived working for the U.S. Marines for 30 years. I have over 70 years working for the government. Got the Medal of Honor from President Obama, and got the Medal of Honor from Pak Jong-hee, and got the Medal of Honor from Vietnam, saving a pilot. And
why did you enlist in the Army back in 1941?
In 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and they put all Japanese into the concentration camp. I didn't mind it because I thought it was a thrill watching a water-cooled machine gun going around. And I didn't know what an air-cooled machine gun was until I got in the service.
And you were with the 442nd?
I went to the 442nd in Camp Blanding, Florida. There's a gentleman here that said, "What are you doing, Bob?" And I looked at him, and that was a long time now, since 1944. But he remembers me, but I don't remember him. Maybe I'm just no good. I don't know.
So you were in the 442nd, went to Europe, and then transferred to the 101st Airborne Division. Why did you do that?
Well, the 447 was fighting in France. I transferred into the 101st in Journay, France. While the 101st was fighting in Holland, I stayed in Reims, France. In Reims, France, I don't know if this cheap gentleman, he probably knows. In Reims, France, they had replacement depot like Chesterfield, Lucky Strike, Philip Morrison and things. So I was in Chesterfield, and I waited until the unit came back from Holland. Ah. And from Holland, we packed our gear and went to Bastogne.
So what happened at Bastogne?
I honor a fellow named Pee Wee Martin. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be talking to you. He showed me how to survive in the snow, and I survived that. And well, anyway, after Bastogne, I went to. General Taylor said you're going to go to the 82nd Airborne, and I went to Bad Homburg, Germany, and made the jump school in Germany. That's where General Patton. I seen General Patton.
Tell me about General Patton. What kind of guy was he?
He was a wonderful man. Every morning I would stand guard. He would find out if everything was okay. If it wasn't okay, I would tell him. He was a wonderful man.
And unfortunately, he was killed while you were there. Is that correct?
Yes, he was hit broadside by a PFC driving a weapons carrier.
Let me ask you this. You were the only Japanese American in your unit, right?
Yes.
How was there any kind of tension about that, or?
No, there was nothing at all.
You got along with everyone, and everyone got
yes.
along with you? Ah. So the war is over in Europe. Did they send you to the Pacific or not?
No, our outfit was going to go to the Pacific, but General Taylor told me that, took me in his office, and said he couldn't take me because I was a Japanese American. And I said, I have two brothers in Europe and MIS.
Ah.
So there I went to the 82nd Airborne.
Okay. So at the end of the war, you got out, but were called up again for Korea, I understand?
No, I stayed in the service.
Oh, you stayed in the service?
Stayed in the service from 44 to 2007.
And where did you serve in Korea?
I stayed in Korea, in Kunsan, Korea, and Jeju Island, and Dongdong Island, just the bottom of Korea, or the prisoner of war. I stood guard there.
I understand you got a humanitarian award while you were in Korea.
Yes, I saved quite a few boys and girls. The ladies, they're pregnant, couldn't tell who their husband was or their boyfriend. They would take the baby and put them into a cave, and I would find out where the babies were. And I made a Shingon orphanage, and the president gave me the medal.
President of Korea gave you for saving these babies.
Yes,
And where were you in Vietnam?
I was in Ben Thuy, Vietnam, and Jim Martin, who was my mentor in Bastogne. I didn't know Jim Martin's son. I controlled him while he was bombing in Vietnam, and I didn't know Jim Martin had a son there.
So you made a connection from World War II all the way to Vietnam.
Right, and then we had a reunion with the 101st, and I said, Jim said, "You were in Vietnam?" He said, I said, "Where?" I said, "Ben Thuy." He said, "Do you know Lieutenant Martin?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I know a lieutenant." He said, "That was my son." It gives me the goosebumps because I didn't know it was his son so close to me also.
Okay. Let's move on to Peter. Could you give us an idea about what the Navajo Code, how the Navajo Code Talkers were formed, what their purpose was, and your role in it, please?
Yes, thank you. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is one of the most important organizations I ever been invited to, American Veteran Center, and I appreciate it very much. I joined the United States Marine at the age 15, and don't ask me why, except that some of our friends who were in the United States Marine told me the most fearful sight in Pacific was a United States Marine with a rifle, and I wanted that. Anyway, there were two top secrets in World War II. One of them is Manhattan Project. It remained secret until August of 1945. And we all know what happened on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. The other top secret, Navajo Code. Navajo Code remained top secret until 1968. 23 years after the war ended, Navajo Code was declassified. So all during that period, from 1942 until 1968, we were not allowed to tell anyone what we were doing, top secret. Anyway, the enemy was breaking code. They tell us in the Pacific, all military codes were being broken by the Japanese, making it very difficult to communicate strategy in this huge Pacific area, where it takes days to go from point A to point B. And they had all that time to break the code and know where you started, what route you're taking, and where you're going to be, what day and what time. And they would be there with their submarine, blow up your shipment of supplies, equipment, and personnel. They needed a code in early 1942 to take advantage of the war in the Pacific. That's why Navajo Code was developed, so that the enemy or anyone else who might be listening in would not know. All top secret confidential messages were sent in Navajo Code. Navajo Code was developed in early 1942, before any landing in the Pacific. Top secret operation. 29 young Navajos were recruited by United States Marines to develop the first set of code words. Code words that would identify most of the military language that are used, military equipment, things like that. Code words were developed in Navajo language by the first group that went in 1942. As a matter of fact, May of 1942, they developed the first set of code words, 260 code words. That was then tested on the first landing in the Pacific, Guadalcanal, August 1942. Marines landed, 1st Marine Division landed on the island of Guadalcanal, and they tested this code that was developed by 29 young Navajo Marines. It passed muster. Marine and Navy then actually accepted the Navajo Code to be used in every landing from that day on. 2 communication networks were established. Navajo Communication Network for all top secret and confidential messages. The second communication network was English, all other messages. Messages you don't care if the enemy breaks the code or understand what you're talking about, went through English network. These 2 communication networks work side by side all through the landing in the Pacific. Guadalcanal, Bougainville, Cape Cluster, and New Britain, Tarawa, Macon, Kwajalein, Inuitok, Saipan, Tinian, Guam, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and some of us ended up in North China to get the Japanese in China to surrender. All through that period, over 400 of us Navajo Code Talkers. There was a special top secret school. Well, those of us Navajos who were assigned to be code talkers We went to school, learned those code words that was developed early on, 260 code words. By the time the war ended, we had over 600 code words to memorize. Everything was subject to memory only. We cannot take any notes into battle to refresh our mind of what the code words were. It has to be here. So that's the reason for the code, and it was developed in early 1942, tested on Guadalcanal, and after the war, over 400 of us were certified, went to Navajo Code School, learned the code words, and served in all of these landings. At least 80 Navajo Code Talkers were assigned to each Marine divisions. Of course, we start out with one Marine division, 1942. By the time the war ended, there were 6 Marine divisions. Each division had at least 80 Navajo Code Talkers.
Could you give us some examples of some of the code words that were used?
Okay, well, let me give you an actual message that was sent on Iwo Jima. On Iwo, there were over 200 of Navajo Code Talkers participated. 3 divisions, 3 times 80, that's over 200 Navajo Code Talkers on the Iwo Jima invasion. 5th Marine Division, 3rd and 4th landed. On the north side, 5th Marine Division was in deep trouble. They were being fired upon from all directions. Mortar shells were being dropped down on them. They needed help. A commander scribbled a message, handed to a Navajo Code Talker assigned to that company. And message was written in English. Commander gave it to the Code Talker to send that message to Beach Command Post, asking for help. Immediately, the Navajo Code Talker, when he got that message written in English, he connected with the Navajo Code Talkers on a beach command post. Usually there's about 5 or 6 of Code Talkers at the beach command post. Connected with one of them and sent this message. Here's what he said in Navajo. Tepe ana achipi datis trahe de na sonse transi tlochin sita sa tra astra na ki shash. I know you didn't understand what I said unless you're Navajo. But let's see what the Navajo Code Talker at Beach Command Post received. And if you're Navajo, let me tell you what you would have heard this Navajo Code Talker say, asking for help. This is exact words that I just said, official message that was sent. He said in Navajo, sheep, eyes, nose, deer, destroyer, tea, mouse, turkey, onion, sick horse, 3, 6, 2, bear. Does that sound like asking for help? That's exactly what the Code Talker sent by air to a Code Talker at Beach Command Post. What did the Code Talker at Beach Command Post wrote down? Sheep, eyes, nose, deer, sick horse? No. As each Navajo word came across, he writes it down in English. This is what he wrote down. Send demolition team to Hill 362B. That was the message. So, Navajo words were used to develop a code. So not even in Navajo would, if the Japanese would capture a Navajo who had not been through Navajo Code School and have them listen to this, they will tell them, what are they saying? Well, they say, Sheba's nose, deer, sick horse. It means nothing. Only if you were a code talker, when you hear that message, you write down what the exact message was. A lot of people think we're just talking Navajo to each other, like you would with normal conversation. No. Message was, Navajo words were used to develop code. Code, like for instance, code word for dive bomber, Guinea. Guinea in Navajo means chicken hawk. That was the code word for dive bomber. Code word for battleship, Tlotso. Tlotso in Navajo means big fish. Code word for submarine, Beshlo. Beshlo in Navajo means orange fish. That would be the code word for submarine. Code word for tanks, amphibious tank, Chatl. Chatl in Navajo means frog. That will be the code word for tanks. Aircraft carrier, Tidine Yehe, one that carry birds around. That will be the code word for aircraft carrier. Over 600 code words had to be memorized. So that's how the codes were used. As I said, this code that was developed initially by 29 young Navajos, by the time the war ended, everything grew. One division in 1942, Marine Division. By the time the war ended, there were 6 Marine Division. 29 young Navajos started the code in 1942. 260 code words. By the time the war ended, there were over 400 of us. Trained, learned the code words. And also the code words grew from 260 to over 600 code words to be memorized. All through the war, over a dozen Navajo code talkers were killed in action. Every landing, they would assign at least a dozen Navajo code talkers to land with the first wave, the first ones to hit the beach. Why? Because the command ship wants to know immediately where the enemy fires are coming from.
Thank you, Peter.
Yes.
I should also note that there were 400 Navajo Code Talkers. There are only 4 left today, and Peter is one of them. Mr. Whidden, you were a paratrooper on D-Day.
Correct.
Tell me about getting on that plane on D-Day and flying over the water, landing at Normandy.
Okay. I first of all, I had a stroke about 2 years ago, so it's difficult for me to talk properly, and I had to learn to write and everything else. And I went from doing a lot of athletics prior to coming in the military, and most of my life was as an athlete and a coach. In 1940, I joined the Pennsylvania National Guard, and in 1941 I graduated from high school, and I had an appointment coming up to West Point, but then of course we had Pearl Harbor, and that changed my thinking. So I didn't take the appointment to West Point, and I ended up, well, I thought I was going to go to flight school, but that didn't work out. And my father came down the day before we shipped out, and he said, "Sergeant, is my son going to flight school?" He said, "Absolutely, Mr. Whidden." Well, it didn't work out that way. The next day we headed south, and I get up and I said, "Sergeant, I think I'm on the wrong train." And he said, "What are you talking about? I'm supposed to go to flight school." He said, "No, I don't think it's going to work out that way. You're going south, and you'll probably end up in the infantry." I said, "Okay," because I was young. So I enlisted, or rather, I didn't. I'm getting confused now, but that's the stroke. I ended up in the topo engineers. I had been in the combat engineers in the National Guard, and that wasn't too exciting. And although it was interesting work making maps and things like that. So then they transferred me, because I complained too much, to the 8th Infantry Division, an all-Southern division, and they were still fighting the Civil War. There were two of us, they were Yankees. So right away, the one little fellow, he was a little Jewish boy, he took a terrible beating. I had been a wrestler in high school, so when it came my turn to get beat up, I did a pretty good job because I'd been a wrestler. But I did get whacked around quite a bit. And then they didn't have a good baseball team, and I had played baseball, so we got to be good friends, because I was a pitcher and an outfielder. And so then I had a friend from Tennessee, and he said, "Hey, Guy," he said, "guess where I'm going?" And I said, "Where?" He said, "I'm going in the Airborne." "The Airborne?" He said, "Yeah, the paratroopers." He said, down there in the, what did we call it in those days? See, a lot of things drop out of my head. Well, anyhow, I saw a sign there where the first sergeant's office was. It said, "Join the parachute troops." So it wasn't but 2 or 3 days later, I was on my way to Fort Benning, Georgia, and went through the 4 weeks of training as a paratrooper. And after graduation, most of my friends that I met there were assigned to go to the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, but I ended up being the only one to go up to the 502 Parachute Infantry Regiment. And once again, I had to, well, there was one fellow there, and I was only 18 then, and he said, "It's been a sort of a tradition to beat up the young ones coming in." And to make a long story short, he came over to my locker a couple of days later, and he said, "Whidden, it's your turn." And I said, "Well, I want you to understand this. I was a wrestler in high school." And he just looked at me and turned around and walked away. So I didn't get beat up. Yeah.
Let's move forward a little bit to England and getting on the plane and going to Normandy. What was that like?
England, that was a great place. The British girls were very sweet. And I danced. I took dancing up. I had dancing up when I was 12 years old. I was actually forced into it. But so I danced a lot with the English girls, and we get along fine. And I didn't spend much time in the pubs and stuff. I was more interested in staying in shape. You know, I was gung-ho about that sort of thing. So
Normandy.
Normandy. Well, that came quite a bit, 3 or 4 years later. And we get on the planes. Well, prior to getting on the planes around 4 o'clock, Eisenhower showed up, and there were a group of them talking to him, and we liked him right away. He just seemed like a real fine general, and it looked at times like tears were rolling down out of his eyes, because he thought that many of us would get killed. Now, I was about 15 or 20 feet away from because it were mostly sergeants and officers who were talking to him. So, but we could hear some of what was going on, and there were 4 of us looking upon this whole thing. Of the 4 of us, 3 of them were my best friends. One got a battlefield commission later on. He was older than me. He was like 23, 24, and they're all gone, my best friends. But anyhow, getting back to getting on the planes, we went down to the planes, and we voted as to whether or not we would smoke on the plane. Well, I didn't smoke, but most of them did, so I was voted out. So we got aboard the plane, and it seems like we circled around for quite a while, and the trip over was not so nice. There wasn't a bathroom on the plane. It was C-47, C-46. And so if you had to go to the bathroom, you can imagine just what you had to do. It was difficult for the simple reason that we had so much equipment, and we had all kinds of stuff. We had fragmentation grenades attached on our belt, and we were from inside out. We had long johns and everything. So you can imagine, since there wasn't a toilet, it was quite a mess aboard. Wasn't too pleasant. And so we got to the islands right off the Cotentin Peninsula, and we'd been flying close over the water to avoid German radar. And the ones that, you know, I'm going back now, the ones who had voted to smoke, of course, the doors were closed and so forth. And so we didn't get to see much of anything, but then the doors were open, and some of the spray, because we were right over the water, came into the plane, which was refreshing. And then we went up aloft about 1,500 feet, and we had stood up and hooked up, and then the command came to go out of the plane, and I was the last one out, and some of my buddies said they put you last because they didn't think you'd jump. So, but actually, I was kind of jump happy, so my job was primarily to see that everybody got out. So when we came into St. Mary Glees, our plane was the first combat plane, according to what we were told, first combat platoon to land in France. Of course, I'm sure other units say they were the first ones, but our platoon officers said we were the first, and so we were all pushing for the door, jumping out, and not everybody could get out in time because we were going over St. Mary Glees and going toward Omaha Beach. Well, what the pilot did, I was afraid, there were about 3 of us left, that he was going to go back to England. So he went back out over Omaha Beach. Of course, they hadn't hit the beaches yet because it was 1 o'clock in the morning when we jumped, 5 or 10 minutes after 1. And so he circled around and with the glider, no, I'm C-47, I'm sorry. It came back and the rest of us exited out of the plane. So when I hit, we jumped at 300 feet, and the height that we jumped was given to us later, and we put it in our jump books. But 300 feet, by the time you get out of the plane and everything, you're about on the ground before your chute's completely opened. So it was like a crash landing for me, right near a hedgerow. And then I saw, of course, not like the movies, we had camouflage chutes, not white chutes. The white chutes had our equipment and so forth, so that when they hit the ground, we'd go and open up a bundle and hope it was our own bundle. And I was an assistant machine gunner, and as a private. And my job, of course, was to get a hold of the machine gun. But where I landed, I didn't land with any of my friends at all. As a matter of fact, didn't see them until later in the day. And so anyhow, I was watching this bundle come through the air. It was oscillating like this, and it apparently hit me in the head and knocked me out. And then as I woke up, some other guy was clicking his little cricket. I think I have him. Let's see if I have it here in my pocket. If you want to hold on a minute. This left hand doesn't work too well. Not there. Anyhow, I couldn't find it, just like now. I couldn't find it. And then there was a verbal response because I didn't have that. And I couldn't remember that response because, I was kind of groggy from having been hit by the equipment bundles. They weighed 300 or 400 pounds. And so then I started yelling. I said, "Hey, don't shoot me. I went to Cheltenham High School and I was on the wrestling team and I had a redheaded girlfriend." And he said, "You dumb SOB, you." He said, "I almost pulled the trigger." And he said, "You better follow me." I said, "Okay." So we hung out together a short while, but it wasn't until early afternoon that I found any of my own squad or company members. So, but we just mixed in there, and there were firefights here and there.
Mr. Whidden, I think we're going to leave it there.